Hey everyone, this is Dominick from the Comic Book Report YouTube channel, doing another guest review for organicpricedbooks.com. And today I'm mixing it up a little bit, checking out a trade paperback from Marvel Comics. Today we'll be doing an overview for Eternals, Volume 1, Only Death is Eternal, written by Kieron Gillen and illustrated by Asad Ribic. The comics in this volume were published by Marvel Comics beginning in 2021. The volume itself collects Eternals, the 2021 series, issues 1 through 6. And finally, this is a standard-sized trade paperback with a glued binding, glossy print paper stock, and it comes in at 160 pages. Taking a look at the front cover of that trade paperback, you have an excellent reproduction of the cover of issue 1 of this series with cover art by Ribic. And honestly, this is really indicative of the style of artwork you can expect inside. Ribic's art to me is always really interesting. I'm first familiar with him through his work with Jonathan Hickman on Secret Wars, but it has a really kind of dreamy quality, and I'm not really sure what gives it that appearance to me, but there's just something about it that feels a bit unsettling, otherworldly. I think the style is definitely really gorgeous, and it absolutely matches the feel, tone, and even characters of this series. I think this pairing of artist and writer for this book is pretty perfect. On the back cover here, you have Icarus with Thanos. Definitely a couple heavy hitter kind of characters in this book. This was really a fascinating read for me. I can't wait to get into it a little bit more with you today. But before we do, I do want to take a look at the binding really quick. As I mentioned, it's just a glued binding. This is just a standard trade paperback. I had no issues with the binding though, and as far as gutter loss, you can see as I flip through it, I didn't find it to be too bad at all. Okay, and for the remainder of this video, we can actually do the overview proper, and I'll flip through the collection a little bit, trying to go very minimally on spoilers, but to give you an idea of what you can expect from this book. I'll say right from the jump, this is actually my first Eternals comic I have ever read. I am familiar with the MCU film that came out a few years ago at the time of this recording, but that was really my entry point into the world of the Eternals. That being said, I had heard that this was a really good jumping on point for prospective fans out there, even new readers, to jump into a new run with some of the industry's best. I know Kieron Gillen is a really popular writer as well, one I'm personally a fan of. I really enjoy what he does with Once and Future amongst some of his other titles. I know he's worked on some of the Star Wars comics as well. And again, he's a pretty prolific writer. I like what he does with these kind of science fiction, fantasy genres. And as I mentioned at the top, I think Ribic was a perfect pairing for this title and for Gillen specifically. There is that kind of dreamy, surreal quality to the artwork from Ribic, and I think that matched not only Gillen's usual style, but also really helped create this world of the Eternals, where even though things were so fantastical and kind of odd, it all felt kind of within the scope of these characters, and seeing it all visually realized, I think it was just really well done. These creators, again, are some of the top in the industry, and I do think that this was a pretty valiant effort. The story picks up just kind of in the middle of their ongoing lives. There's no origin story here. This just jumps right into the world of the Eternals. But they do make it, I think, as accessible as maybe possible. But I do think, for myself, if I had never read an Eternals book and I had never seen the film, I would have been quite lost, because there's definitely a pretty big ensemble cast of characters in the Eternals, and I think some of their dynamics between the characters are not as much explained in this volume. But again, if you've seen the movie, you kind of get a better feel for some of the characters, and that was really my foundation before reading this, and I think that helped me tremendously in understanding this book. I do think if you're a brand new reader and you have not watched the movie and these are brand new characters, it might be a little bit jarring diving into the world of the Eternals. I am curious, for those that have read this title in the past under different creators, what you all think of that perspective. I think that I was able to stay afloat, again, having seen that movie, but I do think if you just blind read this, you would feel like you were just trying to play catch up for maybe most of the issues. Okay, for those that maybe don't have any basis for the Eternals, essentially they're a sequence of characters in the Marvel Universe that are sort of artificial humans with incredible powers that are essentially immortal, or when they die, they get reborn with most of their memories kind of backed up. They're like almost robots, almost kind of artificial creations, but the idea is that they've been on this planet for thousands and thousands of years, and they're this force for kind of good. They were basically created to root out and get rid of these kind of air quotes bad characters known as the deviants. That is basically the function of them. But yeah, these characters have been around for thousands of years. When they die or things happen, they get kind of rebooted with some of their memories. Some of them have served with the Avengers, things like that. But yeah, it's a really great cast of characters here. We follow primarily the character of Icarus, who kind of regenerates from this pod, trying to figure out what has transpired since last time. And they get caught up in this bigger conspiracy. Pretty soon, I think at the end of the first issue, we have Thanos show up and get into direct conflict with the Eternals. We don't really know what the baggage is there or why there is such a sense of conflict right away, but that is some of the inherent mystery of this first book that we begin to unravel. There's a lot of just kind of political intrigue and family drama amongst the Eternals, trying to figure out who you can trust, how we can get sort of the band back together, as it were, and it's just a really interesting concept and setup. I do think that this is still a good volume 1, even though it's a really big ensemble cast. We do have this as really a foundational volume. There's a handful of great Marvel cameos that I thoroughly enjoyed, and interspersed within the issues, they did have these expositional page or 2-page spreads that showed up that gave background on the factions of Eternals or Deviants or different kind of backgrounds on these characters. It was really similar to what I saw with the House of X Powers of 10 and kind of Krakoa era of the X books, but I think it was done a little less effectively. I feel like as much as those were a very interesting exposition dump throughout most of the X-Men titles, I feel like what we got in the Eternals tried to do that, but it was a little bit more mystifying. I feel like after reading some of their little interludes in this book, I was almost more confused or put off this title. Rather than in the X-Men, I would sometimes be annoyed, but I feel like I would at least get some glimmer of more information that helped me with the title itself. So maybe I'm just misunderstanding there, but I think that was a really interesting narrative choice that personally I felt you could do without in this book. Another interesting setup is the narrator for this book appears to be the planet Earth, who has its own degree of sentience to comment on the matters of the Eternals. This was a really strange choice in my opinion. I'm not sure if this is something that has happened throughout the Eternals run historically, but it was kind of throwing me off in the beginning, trying to ascertain exactly who it was talking. I think they even released that really early, that it might have been the Earth. But it is really interesting just seeing the connection that the Earth has with these Eternals who have been on this planet for, again, a long time. One thing I will say, I do like the ensemble cast in this book. I think all of the Eternals they show in this title are pretty interesting. They have a range of abilities and personalities, and definitely a wealth of deep shared history. But I think that it's kind of a double-edged sword. I think that Gillen and the team really get the family drama between these characters. It feels authentic, real, and earned. But at the same time, I do feel these characters, for lack of a better word, their artificiality. I don't feel like there's really a lot of humanizing traits for many of the Eternals that help me really sink into these characters. In fact, I think it's some of these secondary characters and maybe a small handful of the main Eternals themselves that I'm able to lock in on, as far as character-wise, to make me empathize, sympathize with these characters. Otherwise, it's almost like you're, again, trying to get in touch with something very robotic and cold. And I think that that really, again, serves this title and what these characters are, but it made it sometimes a little bit harder for me to grasp. And again, I'm not sure if that's just my reading of the book, but that was my takeaway. And I think it is for some Eternals more than others. I do think Thanos, and that's not really a spoiler as he's on the back cover, I do think that his introduction into this Eternals world was really good. I do feel like when I first saw that he was going to be in this on that back cover, I did think it felt a little bit pigeonholed, but I do feel like his presence is really earned, and it is a really terrific part of this book. I do think it was definitely gripping. We have great sense of conflict and villain, and like I said, the central mysteries we get to unravel beginning in this book were really fun, and honestly, that central base of what is happening, who's behind what's going on, was definitely a really big narrative thread that I got to pull page after page. I do think that this was a good entry volume overall, but I am starting to feel like maybe this title isn't quite for me. I know that there's a ton of people who love it, and I am curious enough to hopefully one day finish out this run by Gillen, maybe even see what that Judgment Day event is all about. But for right now, I just have this first volume as a primer, the first 6 issues, and I will say the art was terrific. terrific. Some of the characters were really fun, and I like the kind of fantastical layer to the Marvel Universe this appears to add. But overall, it was a little bit hard for me to engage, but I am curious to see what everyone else out there thinks. We did have a small handful of extras at the back that you got to see. If you're interested in picking up your copy, definitely check out Organic Price Books. And for more reviews from me, Dominic, check out my channel, The Comic Book Report. Thank you so much. Have a good one.